Hi everyone, thanks for joining. Welcome to the first Open Digital Meetup. This is not how we anticipated it to go. We kind of wanted to show you our new fancy sparkly waterfall offices, but this is still kind of good that this can go ahead. We're all in isolation at home, I hope, and safe behind doors. But yeah, hopefully this is maybe we can squeeze in a few more of these events. We've got Steph and I were discussing times and stuff beforehand. This is coming at a time where this isn't. Sorry?
This is the correct poll if you guys want to answer, because there's an evening option. The poll's anonymous. And we're just maybe thinking maybe it'd be better if it's digital to do it like in the late afternoon, like 4 o'clock or 3, or still is early evening better.
Yeah, just make a choice.
So you guys are welcome to answer that.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, so we're in strange times, so maybe this is a welcome escape from the world outside for an hour or two. So yeah, just welcome and thanks for joining. We've got some on tonight. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
So tonight we've got Tim from Elastic joining us, showing off application performance management from Elastic. I've really been waiting to see this demo for quite a while. And then we've got Andrew and Andre from LSD showing off navigating containers, which is going to be really good. According to the Meetup group's feedback when asked what everyone wants to see, containers, Kubernetes, managed services, that kind of thing came back as a clear interest. And then we're going to have Q&A sessions after each of the presentations. And then at the end of everything, if you miss a question coming later, we're just going to leave it open for a couple of extra minutes just so you can get some of the questions in. Yeah, thanks. We're going to start now. I'm going to hand this over to you.
Go for it, Tim.
I'm going to kill your screen sharing for a second. All right, so thanks, guys. My name is Tim Brophy. I've been with Elastic now for 6 months. I'm based in Johannesburg. So previously, Elastic would service the region or look after clients and partners here remotely. Elastic is a distributed company, sort of by intention. So that's how it's worked in the past. But South Africa obviously represents quite a big opportunity. Some very large clients out here, big use cases, and the sort of Elastic strategy has turned to putting people that are focused on an African number. So I'm based here. I have a contemporary who looks after sales. He's based in London. And I'm sure you guys, if you've been involved in the Elastic community, would know a guy called Damien, as well as Johannes and Dave Ross. They're 3 South Africans that look after clients in the region, as well as other parts of the world, but they're based in South Africa as well. So Elastic is sort of making a big commitment and a big play in South Africa. So I've, like I alluded to my chat with George now, just while we were waiting for the call to warm up, I've come from a background of having worked in Dimension Data for about 11 years, have done a multitude of things around application development and like lifecycle management and agile management and pre-sales architecture. I also worked for IS, funny enough, George. So I've hopped around a lot in the group, but yeah, now I'm focusing on Elastic and the very many use cases, which is obviously one of the bigger things that is, or let's say one of the bigger learning curves around Elastic is you can technically pick up how Elasticsearch works and how to administer a platform, but the use case sort of variance is quite wide. So many people have in the past sort of really struggled to package Elastic as, okay, what is, when we talk about Elasticsearch, is it search, is it because, you know, it's obviously built initially as a to solve a search use case? Is it about logging and metrics because so many people are using us for log management and metrics visibility? Is it security because now Elastic is making noise around moving into the security space? So we've essentially packaged our go-to-market around a theme of 3+1. So the first being search, because that underpins absolutely everything that we do. The second being observability, because we have this natural inclination towards taking application logs and making sense of them. And then thirdly, security, because obviously we're collecting so much data about the real estate and the environment as it stands. It would be silly not to move into the security space because we have such visibility already. Everyone still hear me? Charles, audio coming through. I just see Stefan's highlights on my Zoom side. So I don't know if that means.
Oh, I can see your screen and hear you fine.
Okay,
Yep.
cool.
Awesome.
All right. Yeah, like I did also, I caveated as I joined, there will be kid noises in the background. It is bath time at my house at the moment.
Yeah, that's fine. Don't worry about that, Tim.
So our themes are 3+1. So it's the three that I've mentioned. The +1 being your use case, because we don't want to box Elasticsearch into a particular set of use cases. It really can achieve so much. Tonight I'm going to talk about observability, and that would be the combination of logs, metrics, and application performance management. I'm going to maybe spend a little bit more time on the application performance management by going through a scenario where we're going to troubleshoot an anomaly that gets detected by our machine learning engine, and basically flow through the different levels that Elastic is currently looking at in this demo environment. Obviously, this is currently, if we're looking at tools and the current landscape of many tools that do very specific ring fence things like log management or metrics or application performance. If you're an engineer, you're an application developer, and you need to troubleshoot something, oftentimes this is what your window looks like when you're trying to get to the bottom of something. That might apply in a more traditional monolithic environment. And then as we move into more of a complicated, somewhat obviously more complex, but very abstracted, and I guess the theory is much easier. I don't know about the reality of it at the moment, but when we move into a highly complex, containerized, orchestrated environment, it's somewhat difficult to actually get to the root cause or get to understand what's going on at a very granular level. And sometimes your screen could potentially look like this, because obviously environments come up and they live and they die based on application load and usage and scaling patterns and things like that. So it becomes very difficult to piece together a very unified granular picture. So we are focusing on addressing this, not only in more traditional enterprises, but again, where architectures are going, microservices, there's a lot of orchestration in the environment, and there's a lot of different deployment patterns, and different deployment technologies from Kubernetes, vanilla Docker, or virtual machines, or physical hosts. We really aren't trying to ring fence how we apply our technology in a particular way. So normally, like, this is the story, right? You have siloed collections of tools, and we've all been there. You're getting infrastructure metrics from one application, you're managing logs with something else, and you're looking at application performance through a completely different tool, which becomes very, very difficult to piece together. So our fundamental view here is that observability, or that's our term, observability, is not it's not a generally accepted industry term yet, but we feel that observability is a use case. So the idea would be to bundle all of that data up, like on a granular level, we'd index data in specific indexes, different types of data in specific indexes, and then normalize them through an Elastic Common Schema, and then publish them through Kibana. It's a lot of talking, and let me click over to my Slack channel. Okay, so the demo kicks off. I just want to show you quickly So we have the demo integrated with Slack because the scenario would be you get an alert from an anomaly detection engine. That anomaly detection engine can fire a watcher alert notification either to email, either to PagerDuty, or to an API endpoint such as Slack. So in this one, I've got 2, and the architecture or the context of what we're looking at is an e-commerce store. It's called Hip Store, and I'm getting 2 alerts. The first would be high mean transaction duration for the front end, and then that's been acknowledged by another engineer on my team. And then I've got a new one, which is this high mean transaction duration for a particular ad service. So let's quickly pause and have a look at what my architecture looks like. So it's an e-commerce platform. I've got a product catalog on the bottom right here. I've got a checkout service. I can tell you it isn't obviously called out on this, but there are various technologies at play. So the front end would be Node.js. There's some Python in here. There's some Go. Basically microservices, and the whole thing is orchestrated through Kubernetes. So this is kind of where a lot of our clients are going. But ultimately, you know, even though there's this nice Kubernetes presentation layer or orchestration layer, there's physical resources that are behind that. So how do you piece together if we have some issue on the website, on the e-commerce platform, on a particular service in here? How do we find the actual root cause across this very complicated real estate? So you can see our different services. You've got cart, currency, recommendation, different product catalogs, and then we have this thing called the ad service. So that's the alert that I'm going to deal with. And then just as a point of reference, so we have APM implemented on all of our services. So that's application performance management. So we're actually doing application transaction tracing. We conform to open tracing. So the idea is not to have our own schema of tracing frameworks. It's really to align to a common schema. And we have things like metric beat looking at infrastructure metric performance, and also file beat looking at log files. Guys, I'm not going to watch the chat because that's going to distract me. So if anything sharp, if anything comes up, they just
don't worry about it. I'll keep my eye on everything, Tim.
Okay, someone's more than welcome to call me out, so you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, because I don't.
Everyone's just complaining about Charles' lack of snacks.
Yeah, we're still going with the 0 out of 10 venue, 0 out of 10 snacks.
George, this slide was for you. I didn't realize it at the time, but this one's for you.
Can we, if we have questions, can we stop and ask you, or do you want us to ask you at the end?
Timo, I think you're more than welcome to stop and ask. I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, if we've got a session Q&A session at the end of Tim's of his session, but I mean, if Tim doesn't mind, we can just. Can everyone see the buttons on the side here that says raise hand?
No.
Yeah, I can see it. I'll raise my hand. Just doing it as an example.
So if you've got a question, raise your hand, and then we can either stop Tim or wait until the end, depending on how.
I never raised my hand in school, so I'm going to start now.
I reserve the right not to answer. And look, I didn't caveat this, right? So I've got a broad background. Guys who live every day in logging in metrics are gonna have loads of questions that I'm happy to take back to my colleagues at Elastic. I'm not going to pretend to know the answer to everything. Obviously, like I said, Elasticsearch is a broad use case, and my job is to try and piece those use cases together. So by all means, ask me tough questions. I just want to raise the bar or set the bar quite low to say I may not be able to answer you right away. Okay, so cognizant I'm going to bump into max time now with 20 minutes to go. So here we have a single metric viewer in our anomaly detection engine. So I'm not going to go into the anomaly detection job. That's a separate demo completely, but basically we're using machine learning capability here to check anomalies in our log files and our performance metrics and patterns. So essentially, if I go back to the Slack, This was about a high mean transaction duration for the front end. Someone's very unhappy about having to get out the bath. We're seeing alerts around about, it's the sort of, what was this, like 10:30-ish mark. And then you can see that there's all sorts of like minor anomaly alerts that come through in the aftermath of that. Got these annotations here. If you have a look at that screen, if I mouse over, it says new deployment. So what we've released recently was the ability for engineers to actually comment and make annotations around issues that pop up. So if I wanted to look at this and go, oh, maybe I want to comment on that, I just select that that area on the timeline and I make a comment. So what happened here was that there was an upgrade, right? So someone, I guess, rolled out a new piece of capability or functionality. We had a new deployment, and kind of the comment was, well, these anomaly scores are bad because we have this new deployment that's just been rolled out. So let's just wait and see. And then you can look on this front end service, because remember, this is now for that front end alert. Things don't go so well, but they're not dramatically bad, right? So it's just degraded performance. You can, if you want to, you can see down here, we have these anomalies that get picked up. You can also see which job picked it up and which transaction influenced that. So this one, for example, is 4 times higher than normal. So that's how, that's why that got raised as an anomaly. 4 times higher is bad, but what you'll see now as I move on to the ad service, it's dramatically worse than that. This is somewhat, I mean, if you're looking at more traditional logging and metric analysis and monitoring tools, this is somewhat like your dynamic baseline. The only difference is that we're learning what your baseline is and we're adjusting it as we go. So the next alert, excuse me, next alert would be for a high mean transaction on the front end, on the ad service, sorry, not for the front end. So that comes through slightly later, okay, like half an hour later. So I clicked through, I mean, if I was going to click on that link, it would take us to this tab here. And now you can see that this is the time series analysis for that metric as well. Let's just zoom in slightly. So I will just focus on that time span over there. This is when our new deployment happened. Now you can see that our baseline of our transaction timeframes like really changes very dramatically after that new deployment. So you can see minor impact anomaly scores. That carries on for about half an hour. And then we have a major impact and then goes back to being this minor impact. So obviously there's something not quite right happening on that space. You can also see if we're looking at our anomaly alerts at the bottom here, this one's now 14 times higher than normal. Okay, so the high mean transaction duration is very severe. So our machine learning job's basically alerting us to the fact that this is a very severe issue. So let's have a look at our APM service, which is our application performance monitoring. Before I go there, let me also say, so this is what you can, in terms of the actions that you can perform on those anomaly scores, you can move on to looking at the APM service and diving in deeper. You can also explore this data in Lens. And if we have time, I'll come back to that because that's really quite interesting. The new Lens capability that we deployed in 7.5 now, I think is when it came in. You can also, for example, if this is being raised in as an anomaly and it's severe, but you want to essentially treat that as the new normal, you can now go and configure that rule as well. Okay, so now we're looking at our ad service. So you can see we're in APM services, the ad service, and now we're looking at that particular transaction that was causing that that high mean score or that anomaly severity. From a time span point of view, you can see this is when our deployment happened. So we see this dip. That's when the deployment was switched on, and you can see that over time it kind of gradually gets worse here. As I track on this graph up here, you can see that I'm tracking on the ones below as well, so that I can start to go, okay, well, if I'm looking at this primary graph in terms of time spent per span type, I can now also basically relate it back to things like transaction duration, request per minute. So if I'm looking at this top over here in terms of performance, I can also then go back and see, well, am I getting more requests or less requests, or what really is the behavior? good tabs at the top left hand here to just point out we have our transaction. So this is currently the view that I'm looking at. I can also look at errors, because errors would be, so what in the log files are being raised as error messages, because that's going to tell me exactly what's going on. If there are if it's like application errors that are coming up. But in reality, we're not seeing anything, which is tricky, right? So we don't really understand that.
So, would that be a filter on syslog-d varlog messages, or would that be actually error.log that is filtered into a specific channel?
George, I'm not sure exactly. I guess it depends on how this index is configured. I'll have to look it up for you. I can't really answer that.
Interesting, sake. Okay.
Yeah, it's a bit more granular than I'd be able to get back to you on right away. But just make a note of that if you don't mind, Charles or George. You're more than welcome to ping me on that via mail, because I think we've got a mail trail going already. So now what I can look at is the JVMs for that particular service, which is quite useful, right? So now I'm like, okay, cool. Well, I've got this service going here. It's back. I've got the service here. What is a JVM performance? And I can dive into that. So again, I'm like, I could spend a couple of minutes on this dashboard, but the reality is you can start to see, what's happening right away. So if we look at our first of all, CPU usage, our max is at 100%, but our average is very low. It's flatlining. This is kind of when just before the deployment happened. It's pretty much not dramatic. It's not telling us anything. You can look at heap memory though, and you start to go, okay, well, this is clearly an issue, because my average used heap memory just from that deployment climbs and climbs and climbs and climbs until I'm out of heap, and then something happens like a crash. Non-heap memory is somewhat of a similar kind of pattern where I lose non-heap and then basically lose some more and crash again. So there's a lot going on there, but obviously it starts to make a lot of sense. This is probably a Java out of memory error. No correlation between the thread counts and what I'm seeing on my heap memory count. And then if I look at garbage collection, there's just a hell of a lot of garbage collection happening right towards the end when I crash, right? So again, more clues that this is most likely some kind of Java out of memory issue. So we need to get to the bottom of that.
Doug, did you have a question?
No, sorry. It was the previous hand up.
Okay, fine. I see the hand was up, that as well.
All good, all good.
While you guys are at the point of asking questions, just want to ask random question, but like, how easy would it be for somebody to swap out, like, let's say, New Relic for the Elasticsearch APM?
We'd have to look at, so you can use New Relic for things like synthetic user transactions and things like that, right? So it depends on what you're using it for and how you're using it. APM is not difficult to roll out. There is, if you want to do transaction tracing, you'd need to import, depending on your language, import a library and reference it in a few lines of code. But from my perspective, it's more of a business impact standpoint. Like, actually, what are you using New Relic for? What's it doing for you from a reporting point of view? Might be worth me saying at this point that the dashboards that I'm showing you, these are out of the box. So if you're going to go with our Beats metric, a little Beats agent to collect metrics and file beat to collect your log files, things like that, that stuff all gets aligned to our ECS common schema, which means that no matter what the end or source platform is, these dashboards will work. So, you know, I would prefer to understand before answering that with a conclusive answer, like how are you using it in New Relic?
Okay, and just to add to that question, like let's say I did want to do that, like I would obviously need some existing Elasticsearch infrastructure, right?
Yeah, 100%. So you maybe don't need infrastructure. You can use our cloud platform, but you got to make sure you got the right license level to get this level of functionality, to get the granularity you need. Maybe it's a longer term discussion, but if you go to cloud.co, you can spin up a 14-day trial and you can start it. You can try it out yourself. So you log in, you sign up here. I'm probably not going to successfully log in because I recently changed my password, but I didn't change any of my LastPass or key stores. But it's dead simple. You can deploy on GCP, you can deploy on AWS or Azure. It's really up to you, and we give it to you entirely as a service. Essentially, you just get an interface and your HTTPS endpoint where you would send data. So I would recommend maybe Timo, and you're more than welcome to ping me and drop me a mail and just give me a rundown on your business requirements or what you're interested in. By default, we offer a 14-day trial. If you ping me, you can get a 30-day trial because we're currently, obviously, with the world being in total shutdown, we're offering double trial lengths at the moment.
Thanks. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Like one company I worked used the New Relic extensively, but there was just a point we got to where it just became so expensive that we had to start looking at other options. Yeah.
So I mean, this is part of the thing, right? Is that oftentimes you are penalized for the amount of data you're collecting, or the amount of endpoints you've got under management. What we're focusing on here is how much data do you want to keep, and that defines your price, not the amount of applications you're monitoring, not the amount of agents you're running, not the amount of technologies you're running. Like it's purely based on the amount of data. And I must also, let me not like bypass the guys who are actually hosting the call. LSD is also a great resource to speak to about, there are Elasticsearch partners. So let me not get you to like ignore let's not ignore the fact that LSD have a long history with Elasticsearch and implementation. So also, more than welcome to reach out to those guys. Is that what you wanted to raise your hand about, Charles?
No. Actually, I see a question in the chat from Wayne about what level of license you need to get that level of granularity that you mentioned.
So APM is actually available in basic. I think we've moved it down to basic, but I think, again, that's probably a longer discussion. If you're looking at anomaly detection and things like that, there is some stuff at a gold level, but we only really release the full capability once you get up to platinum.
Okay, great.
So just, so I'm more than happy to keep going on more discussions. Really helps me to frame the demo, but let me show you quickly something that's quite interesting. So let me I'll drill into this time frame so you can see just after 1 a.m. right, we lost all trace of the application. It came back briefly thereafter as well. And then you can see our request per minute obviously flatlined because the application wasn't available. So clearly we had a full-on outage where the application wasn't available.
So for that, could you actually set an alarm that if something like that happens, it actually raises a flag?
100%. Yeah, you can configure rules to do that.
So you basically pointed to an application server, and in our case recently, we had a ESX server failure. VM migrated, but it didn't start up, and no one noticed it. So in that case, the log feed would actually stop. So the elk stack wouldn't get logs, but you don't have people actually paying attention to. So you need to proactively raise an alarm that, hey, something happened here.
Yeah, George, you can do that a couple of ways. That would be the one. So if I'm not getting any logs, that's a problem. So if I haven't received anything from my endpoint or my source for X amount of time, use Watcher to raise an alert. Otherwise, you can also do uptime monitoring, which is a beat on its own, and then say, okay, I'm actually going to look at that service.
Perfect.
Okay, so I clicked in there very quickly, but what I did was I basically clicked on the transaction name. All right, so this transaction is the one that was affected by that outage or that drop. So I want to look at it in more detail. The previous demo that we had was one with MySQL Server, and it was very interesting because you could actually look at, there was a SQL N+1 situation where a recursive query basically just runs for 300 lines. And when you actually view the transaction, it gives you a good view of what your application, how it's behaving, because you don't really necessarily always see that as a developer. It does stuff in the background. It seems to work, but you don't actually, you don't always, unless you are, you know, persistently looking through the log files, gonna pick up things like that. So it really was quite interesting in the way that it mapped these things out. But here you can see that the ad service is basically doing a query and then doing posting a query to Elasticsearch, and the full transaction is taking 102 milliseconds. Just to kind of give you a little bit more context, I'm going to open up in a new window the full trace. So not only that one transaction, the actual full trace for all services within that group of transactions. And now you can see, like, cool, my product handler was my initial service that did this call, then get product, then it did a whole bunch of things around passing the catalog, etc., etc. So now you're getting a much better view, and with very visual time representations, doing things like converting my currency, that takes a while. So you can now see, okay, well, cool, this stuff is all contributing to the length of my transaction, which is a lovely level of visibility. But let's, yeah, sorry, George.
Yeah, I was actually being quiet till later. How does it integrate it? Is it JMX integration into the app server?
It depends on your framework, but yes, you can. Yeah. So you know, for Python, for example, I got my background is Python development and things like that. So that's you import the library, you put in a function and call the function, and there we go.
Okay, I'm just looking at previous created applications. A lot of the Java servers got JMX exposure of the metrics. So for anything we're running in Java, it's easy to pull it that way. As you say, Python, you have to recompile or add the library in. So it gets a bit more difficult to add libraries to applications that's already out there or that's ISV based. But 90% of them is Java based anyhow. So JMX integration.
Let me confirm around JMX integration. For me, it doesn't raise an alarm bell, but it may be that I've seen it on a roadmap rather than a release functionality, because we're very framework aware. So we're fully compliant with Spring. We're not quite there with Netty, and then there's a couple of others that we work with on Java. But let me confirm around JMX. So from this view, right, I can now do a couple of things, and I'll hurry it along because I'm not sure you're raising your hand to tell me to hurry up.
No. I just see Sean Daniels' hand is also up. I just Sean, have you got a question?
Cool.
Yeah, I was more when we were talking about licensing. We've been running APM for a month now on premise. So we reached out to the sales team just to try and understand the gold subscription. But they mentioned that to be supported, you need 3 nodes. It's price per node. Is there a way around that? So we just want 1 node for APM right now.
Yeah.
Is there a way?
Is this a sales team, or was it a support issue?
It was the contact support on the website, so I'm assuming it's an account manager or something.
Sean, I tell you what the challenge is. When you run less than 3 nodes, obviously, as you would know, you run it in production. You run into issues and you lose data because you're not replicating, or you have performance issues because your queries you're ingesting and you're querying it on the same node, and there's all sorts of things. So our blanket rule is 3 nodes in production. But let's not kill the conversation there. There may be other ways to give you guys what you need. Maybe I'm more than happy to have a conversation afterwards as well.
Okay, great.
Take it offline. But I'm not, look, I won't lie. I mean, we, 3 node minimum if we're going to support it, because that's what Gold's about, right? Is supporting. It's really, yes, it's a feature functionality level, but it's also it's our commitment to support at a particular SLA and we can't really do that when it's a single node. But let's maybe take that conversation offline, look at what you're running, if there's another way for us to do it. Because list price and things like that, I mean, you know, like depending on if you're a startup or what your situation is, that, you know, those things can change.
Cool, thanks.
Cool. So from this transaction, okay, so I understand that I've got like an issue with this transaction. It is turning out to be it's suffering the most from what's going on. And that transaction is a service, or it's related to this service, right? So I'm not going to move my mouse down, but it's basically this, it's a hipstershop.add service, get ads transaction. I want to now look at I could look at the host logs, I could look at the host metrics, but because I'm running Kubernetes, I actually want to do things like look at the pod metrics. And so I'll go have a look at the pod metrics. Mac, don't worry, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to land this plane in 30 seconds. I'm just going to fiddle with the time frame here, make it a little bit earlier and somewhat later, so we can just get a clear picture. So there's no data for this pod before, right? So it's a new deployment. Obviously, there was some additional functionality. So this pod was rolled out. This ad service update was rolled out. So we have no previous data, but you can see here's where the pod warms up and gets going, and then here's where the pod basically on CPU spikes dramatically and then comes down, and memory also like gradually builds up and then crashes and then somehow recovers itself. The main picture I want to just point out on this one is that network traffic has been consistent, fairly consistent, there's no obvious spike here that's saying, okay, well, maybe it got DDoSed and that's why it ran out of memory. So let's, where did I go now? Here we go. Okay, so the metrics for that particular pod shows that there's obviously, again, that memory issue. And let's look at the logs.
Sorry,
so
can you hear me?
Yes, Wayne, how's it?
Hi, yeah. Where do you get the pod metrics from and that sort of thing?
So we have one of our beats is Kubernetes. Is basically it's a Kubernetes beat, and it's aware of the infrastructure. It does auto discovery, so if a new pod comes up, it'll pick it up.
Do you have something similar for LXD containers?
Well, we have for Docker containers. We have. I mean, I guess under the hood, pretty much the same thing. So I can't answer.
Quite similar.
Yeah. Let me have a look. But that's another good one that I can take a look at.
Yeah, I'm guessing that the LXD would leverage from the host rather than from inside, because it tends to be sort of, for want of a better term, server containers rather than application containers. So probably just a normal standard agent. But yeah, I guess don't know whether there's a specific instrumentation for that.
And the same for Docker. It will just be a Docker-L-F. Or Docker-logs.
Picking up from the host.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me
because we've got a bunch of containers on our server, and every now and again something goes. We try and work out which container is the villain is the problem.
That would be a good use case for using Kubernetes.
No, right, but I'm not changing. We're changing slowly. It's a slow process.
Yeah, thanks. So Wayne, let me look into that stuff. I don't think it was explicitly clear when I caveated my background, but a lot of I was heavily involved until virtualization, and then the containerization revolution. I was very much a passenger on. So oftentimes those kinds of questions, that was like the deployment environment, and I just had to live with it, as opposed to getting my elbows dirty and that stuff. Okay, so I'm going to search the log files for that pod and just see if there's any heap issues, and absolutely there is, and it's pretty much when we crashed. So that's good to know. And then let's have a look just at a cursory scan. I can see that I'm seeing cache miss for a particular category, adding items to to the cache. Cache, there's now 891 on the cache, etc., adding things to the cache. So how, like, let me just have a look at the cache and see how many times are there entries for caching. So you can see that over time, basically this pod is literally just doing things on the cache. And it's just putting loads and loads and loads of things into memory, and eventually I'm running out of memory, and my entire pod is crashing and my application goes down with it. So that is pretty much the gist of it. There is another view here which I can also dive into, which is quite nice. I can look at, let's look at the container metrics. I think that's the view. It's quite a nice dashboard where I can now start to see my entire real estate from a metrics point of view. Actually, let's just go straight into metrics. Look at my inventory, and I can see what my landscape looks like. So this is basically, I'm viewing this at a host level, but let's look at it at a Docker level, and let's change the metric that we're looking at to be memory. And I can also just have a look at this based on actual name. I don't have to align to any kind of query language. I can just free text the name in there. And this is the pod that's running, it's the Docker container running the ad service. And I can see that if I basically stream these events live from that environment, the memory will start to climb. So you can see it happening now. And so the issue is currently ongoing as well. And if I go back to the log files, those log files, if I start to stream them, they'll start to basically send me these things about adding cache, more and more things to the cache, which is ultimately where my issue came from. Last thing I want to show you is how this stuff all comes together. This particular dashboard is one that is custom, so you can build it yourself. But if you have I don't know who the right people are these days with these new titles that go around. I don't know, I guess maybe, your your CX whatever needs to see, well, what do logs mean, right? It's just log files. Why should I spend money on this, on log file management and metric management and things? Well, you can bring it all together because what you're able to do is you can take data from multiple indexes and present them on a single dashboard. So we have basically business metrics here. We have the number of ads that we've served. We've got the number of sales by currency, the number of products that we've shipped, our response times in percentiles, and then we're able to dive into the actual real story of our business, which are these log files. So you can start to see here was our deployment around there where certain services went down, and then ad service crashed half an hour later. And what does that mean for us? At a business level, from a sales and shipping standpoint. Again, so log data, summarized metric data, different services. You can see basically from a CPU usage point of view how these services are doing at a high level. You can see this is where we had our crash, and this was the deployment. Sorry, and then you can see that our ad service basically started to get slower and slower and slower as we went along. As well as the number of APM requests that go through to our application. So it's a good way for let's say the traditional kind of IT service or cost center or application providing group and organization to really bundle everything up into a single dashboard that then affects the top line. And the last thing, and I don't think I've actually kept that tab open. Let's go back here. The very, very last thing that I just want to quickly highlight is the fact that, yes, I've used all of the out-of-the-box stuff, with the exception of that last dashboard and the APM service pop-up, but there's also this great thing called Lens, which we released one release ago. I think it's still technically beta, but it works really, really well. So I'm just going to tweak my timelines to when the demo data actually was put into Elastic, and I'm going to choose my index that I'm working on. So a little let's take a metric beat's a good one. And I can now go, well, how do I, with visualizations in Elastic, typically you'd have to decide, well, what do I want to do? I want to build a bar graph? Do I want to build a data table? What do I actually want to do? And what Lens allows you to do is take your data and go, well, this is the best representation we believe for that particular data set. So let's see if we can basically have a look at the types of agents in our environment for metrics. So take that field, drag it onto my little work pane here, and the agent types that I've got is metric agent. File is a good one actually to, no, wrong thing. I want to get my index pattern. File beat's a good one to use because this actually does have different agent types. So I've got file beat and no man, I'm looking for the maybe it's APM. Maybe I'm playing myself here by going off script on the demo. It's always a risky thing. Agent name, there we go. So we've got metric beat, file beat, and now I can look at the different languages, right? So then I've got mostly Go agents out in the wild. So this would be a count of records, right? So this is in terms of my my actual index entries, the different types of records I've got and the agent type. So got a lot of Go entries, some Node.js, some Python. And then I can explore different ways of viewing that data. So I can flip the chart. I can also do a data table to show this is only going to show metric beats because I can't do cross-index counting. And then this will tell me the full count of records and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I can play around with the data, which I think is the main point that I wanted to get at. There's a lot here that you can just drag and drop in, and you can start to then cross-reference different data from different indexes. And then you can build a visualization from that on what makes sense, rather than having to choose up front. Gosh, for my dashboard, I think I need a bar graph for agents and performance, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry, guys, 15 minutes over time, but I hope it was worth it.
Definitely. Does anyone have any questions for Tim while he's still on the line?
Yeah, I've got about 1,000. But I'll just ask one. The one thing I'm curious about is the metric beats that showed the details of the pods, like memory, CPU, disk. Is there a list of what metric beats actually can give us? So for example, we use Prometheus at the moment, and the CPU and the memory is kind of okay, but we care about a lot. We care about a lot of other things. Like we care about pod restarts, we care about CPU throttling, and we get all that from Kubernetes itself. So I'd love to be able to see this is what metric beats can actually show you. Like I'm all for CPU, but it's actually not important in the big scheme of things.
Sure. This is what I do all day, every day. So, I honestly I go through the documentation. To answer those kinds of questions, all I do is I dig into the documentation in the backend. But absolutely, I will. I'll send you the link to that the spec.
Thanks. You can post it in the chat over here.
Yeah, I will do. Good idea. Yeah.
The second thing I wanted to ask the follow-up is a very common combination of what we do is Elastic for logging and Prometheus for metrics. But what you've seen now, or what I've seen now, it seems like this can replace Prometheus. I don't know, is that something that you guys are gaming towards, or is that something that you would recommend? Like, I don't know if you know anything about Prometheus, but I'm kind of saying, like, I'm at this point now where should I start investigating Elastic as a replacement for Prometheus? Just your opinion.
Yeah, I can't really say. Like my background, the only real tool that I've got real deep experience would be like Nagios and CAUIM and things like that. We do that. Let me just say we replace Prometheus often, but again, like it depends on the use case. It's very difficult for me to concretely say, yeah, look, obviously chuck that out and put Elastic in. Elastic can absolutely ingest that data. There's no reason, in fact, I mean, if you are maybe if it makes total business sense for you to keep getting your metrics from that, we can 100% get that data from Prometheus. We have lots of clients who are using that, using Prometheus in that architecture. So yeah, I guess because I mean, you know, in a former life, what we were doing was we were taking metrics from UIM and we were basically pushing it to Elastic through an API endpoint. So it, you know, that you don't have to get rid of anything necessarily. We welcome all data sources, but we can collect metrics, you know. So it depends on what your actual, what was the inflection point of the decision that led you to implementing Prometheus. And if we can meet all of those, then maybe it was platform, you know, I don't know what platform you're running necessarily. So like things like AIX, or, you know, like obviously that's a challenge for us, you know, like more legacy, old school stuff. We're not quite there yet, but I don't personally see a reason why we wouldn't go down that route to look at that.
Cool. I've got more questions. I don't want to take up anybody else's time.
But Neil, maybe pop Charles a mail and we can set up a discussion.